I had been driving for barely half an hour when a chill ran down my spine. The kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach tighten. My name is Marin Calloway. I'm 62, and I've spent most of my life balancing careful planning with instinct, usually. I pride myself on keeping both in check. But this morning, instinct was winning. Julian, my husband of 40 years, hummed along to the radio. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel. I glanced at the back seat. There it was, the small black overnight bag Lila had insisted I carry for the weekend trip to the lakeside cabin. Ordinarily, I would have tossed it into the trunk and ignored it, but something about the way it sat there, innocuous yet charged, set every nerve in my body on alert. I remembered Lila's phone call earlier. Her voice too sweet, too careful. "Mom, don't forget the bag," she'd said, almost trembling. And then, the words that had stopped me cold. "I love you." Spoken in a way I'd never heard before on a casual call. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. "Turn the car around now," I shouted before I even fully realized it. My voice cracked with a mix of fear and urgency. Julian's eyes widened, hands tightening on the wheel. He hesitated for a heartbeat, looking at me, reading the panic I couldn't hide. Then, without a word, he tapped the blinker and eased the car into a slow U-turn. His trust in me absolute. As we angled back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the sense that this one decision, one split-second command, might be the difference between ordinary family drama and something far more dangerous. The bag in the back seat no longer seemed innocent. Julian eased the car onto the shoulder, keeping a careful eye on the traffic while his hands gripped the wheel with the steady confidence I had come to rely on for over 40 years. In the silence that followed my shouted command, I realized how deeply our partnership had been forged, not in grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but in decades of small, unspoken understanding. I glanced at him, reading the quiet concern in his eyes, one raise of an eyebrow, a subtle nod, and I knew he understood exactly what I was feeling without me saying another word. That was the rhythm of our marriage, a trust built on years of shared decisions, mutual respect, and the countless moments where one of us had leaned on the other without hesitation. I remembered the night we bought this house together in Portland, signing papers while the rain streaked the windows, our hands brushing over the counter as we debated tile colors and kitchen layouts. I remembered holding his hand through my mother's final illness, him never faltering in his support, never questioning the late-night phone calls, the long drives, the small crises that marked the ebb and flow of life. Now, in the middle of a highway that stretched toward the distant hills, that same trust carried us. Julian didn't argue, didn't question, didn't even ask why. He simply obeyed, trusting my judgment, trusting the instincts I had honed through a lifetime of raising a family and protecting those I loved. It was a calm, steady obedience born of love, not fear, a reassurance that even in the midst of chaos, we could navigate together. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just a fraction. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us, moving in silent synchrony. A partnership that had weathered decades of trials. And yet, beneath the comfort of that trust, a flicker of unease remained, an awareness that this instinct-driven decision might lead us into something far darker than anything we had faced before. The last 5 years had become a pattern I barely recognized until that moment on the highway. Lila had stumbled through one setback after another: job losses, unexpected rent hikes, medical bills, and somehow, the weight of it always ended up on my shoulders. At 62, I had expected to slow down, to savor the quiet of retirement with Julian, Yet my life had become an endless cycle of checks, spreadsheets, and dropped-off groceries. I remembered the countless evenings I spent reviewing bills while Ethan played on the floor beside me, his laughter echoing through the kitchen. Gas money, utilities, car payments, daycare tuition. It all fell to me, 100 here, 200 there. Each payment justified in my mind as temporary support, a way to keep the family afloat until they could regain their footing. But months turned into years, and the pattern never wavered. Weekends were no reprieve. I had become the permanent babysitter, pushing swings at the park, reading bedtime stories, wiping away tears when scraped knees demanded more than just a bandage. Ethan had grown confident, exuberant, and safe in my care. But somewhere in the background, Lila's thanks had begun to feel muted, obligatory rather than heartfelt. I caught her rolling her eyes at the grocery counter, heard the quiet mutterings under her breath, and even as I ignored them, a small seed of doubt took root. Still, I loved those moments with Ethan, the stories, the games, the warmth of his small hand in mine. They had been the reward for every sacrifice, the reason I justified the endless giving. But looking back, I could see the subtle entitlement had crept into Lila's behavior, the assumption that I would always be there, that my limits were invisible, my patience inexhaustible, the quiet disregard, the expectation that I would shoulder the burden without question, began to weigh as heavily as the bills themselves. Even then, I had told myself it was family, that mothers did this, that grandmothers did this. I never imagined that the devotion I had given so freely could be twisted, exploited, until the day I recognized it in the small black bag on the back seat, and my instincts screamed that my trust might be leading me into danger. It started with a phone call that should have been ordinary. Lila's voice, usually warm and easy, carried a tension that made my chest tighten. "Mom," she said, almost carefully, "Ethan has been offered a spot at Willow Creek Academy. The tuition is steep, $18,000 a year. Could you help cover it?" I felt the familiar pull, the tug of obligation that had guided me for years. But this time, I paused. I thought of the retirement savings Julian and I had meticulously built, the modest cushion that was meant to see us comfortably into our 70s. I thought of the bills I had already covered, the sacrifices I had made, and the silent hope that Lila would recognize them, not take them for granted. "I'll have to think about it," I said carefully. There was no hesitation in my voice, but a slight firmness that she hadn't heard in years. I could hear the surprise in her response, a sharpness that immediately set me on edge. "Just think about Ethan's future." "Mom," she said, her words clipped, almost dismissive. That was the moment I realized how far the balance had shifted. The generosity that had once been met with gratitude was now expected, assumed, and manipulated. Calls that once carried warmth and laughter became curt check-ins, weekend visits. Once treasured routines were now scheduled reluctantly, excuses thinly veiled. I watched Ethan's bright eyes during our brief phone conversations, noticing his subtle confusion when Lila's tone shifted around me. He didn't understand the tension, and it broke my heart. Caught in the crossfire of adult ambitions and manipulations, for the first time in years, I felt a sting of betrayal not from a stranger, but from my own daughter. The realization settled like a weight on my chest. My limits had been invisible, my devotion assumed, my willingness exploited. And in that cold awareness, the first flickers of doubt about the upcoming family trip began to take hold, whispering that the same trust I had extended for decades might be leading me toward something far more dangerous. A week later, the invitation arrived in the form of a cheerful group text. Lila's words were almost rehearsed, each sentence punctuated with excessive exclamation points and emojis that didn't feel like her mom, dad. We've booked a cabin by Lake Oswego for the weekend. Ethan can't wait to see you. We're so excited. Julian glanced at me with a knowing look, reading the unease I tried to hide. I reminded myself that this was what I had wanted all along, a chance to reconnect with my daughter and grandson after weeks of tension. But something in Lila's tone, the carefully measured enthusiasm, pricked at my instincts. The excitement felt too perfect, too polished, as if it had been rehearsed for my reaction rather than genuine. That Friday, we packed our SUV, loading in snacks, fishing gear, and Ethan's favorite blankets. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents, buzzed with excitement. "Grandma, Grandpa, are we there yet?" he asked, pressing his small face to the window. I smiled, stroking his hair, feeling the warmth of his trust and innocence. His laughter was the reason I had tolerated so much, the reason I had justified the countless sacrifices. The drive started pleasantly enough, the familiar rhythms of family chatter filling the car. Julian hummed softly, occasionally exchanging small smiles with me, our silent communication a comfort against the subtle tension I couldn't shake. I kept glancing at the bag in the back seat, heart tightening each time it shifted slightly with the motion of the car. By mid-afternoon, Lila called from the other car behind us, her voice bright but strange, asking minor questions about the packing and Ethan's snacks. Her tone was careful, almost performative, as if she was watching my reaction. I answered cautiously, keeping my words neutral, my instincts flaring. Every word felt loaded, every pause deliberate. Ethan sang along to a song on the radio, blissfully unaware of the underlying unease. I squeezed Julian's hand lightly, silently acknowledging our shared caution. Deep down, I knew that my desire to reconnect was locked in a quiet struggle with my intuition this trip, meant as reconciliation, might instead be the first step into something far more dangerous. We had pulled into a rest area just beyond Lake Oswego, a quiet spot shaded by pines, where Julian could stretch his legs and Ethan could run around for a few minutes. I kept my eyes on the black overnight bag in the back seat, heart thumping with a tension that had been building all morning. Something in my gut refused to let me ignore it any longer. "Stay here with Ethan," I said to Julian. Though he raised a questioning eyebrow, I didn't need him to know what I was about to do. I lifted the bag onto my lap, the weight heavier than it should have felt, as if it carried more than clothing. Carefully, I unzipped the main compartment, starting with the neatly folded pajamas at the top, the familiar scent of laundry detergent masking the subtle metallic tang beneath. And then I saw them small packages wrapped in plastic tucked beneath Ethan's clothes. My stomach dropped, a chill running straight to my core. Drugs, a significant amount. I froze, hands trembling, as the realization hit me in full force. This was no accident, no casual oversight. Lila had planned this, and worse. She expected me to carry it across state lines, unknowingly putting my freedom, my reputation, and even my safety in jeopardy. I glanced at Ethan playing nearby. Oblivious to the danger, my chest tightened with a combination of fear and fury. How could someone I had raised, someone I had sacrificed for, risk my life like this? My mind raced through the possible consequences. Arrest, federal charges, prison time. At 62, this was more than frightening. It was life-altering. Julian's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "Marin, what is it?" His eyes were calm but alert, searching mine for answers. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I showed him the packages without saying a word. His face went pale, the lines of worry deepening instantly. In that moment, no discussion was necessary. We both understood the magnitude of what had been planned. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the bag tightly. Every instinct screamed at me to remove it, to distance myself from this trap, to protect Ethan, to protect us both. My mind replayed the past weeks, the rehearsed phone calls, the sudden invitations, the over-the-top gratitude. It all clicked into place. This trip had never been about family reconciliation. It had been a calculated plan, a trap disguised as warmth. Relying on my trust and my love for my grandson, I exhaled slowly, forcing my hands to stop shaking. Julian reached over, squeezing my shoulder. No words were needed. The path ahead was clear. I would not be used, and we would leave this rest area with our lives intact. But the betrayal burned hotter than anything I had ever felt. This was the line we could not cross, the danger we could not ignore. Back at home, I placed the bag carefully on the kitchen counter, far out of Ethan's reach, and sat down at the table with Julian beside me. My hands were still shaking, but my mind had begun to settle into a cold, deliberate clarity. There would be no more checks, no more emergency funds, no more blind trust. The line had been crossed, and it was time to enforce it. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, explaining everything in painstaking detail. The packages, the plan, the orchestrated trip. Each word out loud reinforced the seriousness of the situation. My lawyer's voice was sharp, tinged with disbelief and concern, as he advised me to document everything meticulously to protect myself against any accusation, intentional or not. I listened carefully, scribbling notes, taking photographs of the bag and its contents, even recording a brief video inventory. Each step was a shield, a barrier between me and the consequences I refused to bear. When Lila called later that afternoon, her voice had shifted tight, frantic, almost pleading. "Mom, it's not what it looks like. You don't understand." I held the receiver steadily, hearing the panic in every syllable. I didn't interrupt, but I didn't offer comfort either. My silence was deliberate, a reflection of the resolve I had cultivated over decades, strengthened by years of observation, sacrifice, and finally, recognition of my own worth. "I will no longer be providing financial support to your household," I said evenly, my voice carrying the authority that had been absent in my previous interactions. No rent, no groceries, no car payments, no emergency funds. You will manage your own responsibilities from now on. There was a long pause, and I could hear her swallow hard, the panic rising like a tide. I could almost see the realization spreading across her mind, the comprehension that the safety net she had counted on for so long was gone. I hung up and exhaled, a strange mix of relief and sorrow settling over me. Julian reached over and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of our shared strength. Standing firm had not been easy. It had required every ounce of composure I could summon. But for the first time in years, I felt the weight of control back in my hands, the clarity that love did not mean surrender, and the resolve to protect myself and Ethan at all costs. The next morning, the phone rang before sunrise, sharp and insistent. The voice on the other end was official, calm but firm. "This is Officer Martinez with the U.S. Border Patrol. Your daughter, Lila Calloway, and her accomplice were intercepted attempting to cross state lines with illegal substances. You are listed as next of kin." My hands trembled as the words sank in, but beneath the shock was a hard edge of resolve I hadn't felt in decades. Julian stayed close, grounding me, his presence steadying the storm inside. Within hours, The legal wheels began turning. I was instructed to come to the station to provide information, and emergency custody arrangements for Ethan were initiated immediately. By mid-morning, he was with us, clutching his small suitcase and favorite stuffed animal. Looking up at me with wide, questioning eyes, I knelt beside him, brushing back his hair gently. "You're safe now," I whispered. "Grandpa and I are here." Returning home, I set about establishing a household routine that would provide stability for Ethan. School schedules, homework, meals, bedtime rituals, I orchestrated them carefully, balancing comfort with structure. Julian helped him with math and chess, and I reintroduced bedtime stories, the small rituals that had always grounded us both. For Ethan, the transition was abrupt but necessary, and his resilience became a quiet reassurance that the path we had chosen was right. Meanwhile, Lila's panic manifested through frantic calls from her lawyer and snippets of news I overheard. She faced federal charges, and the weight of her decisions bore down on her in ways money and manipulation could never have shielded her from. The sense of justice, though somber, was undeniable. Actions had consequences, and this time, they were unavoidable. By the end of the week, the house had settled into a new rhythm. There was no more uncertainty, no more reliance on misplaced trust, and no more constant worry that Ethan's safety could be compromised by others' recklessness. In the quiet of that Friday evening, as Julian and I watched Ethan curl up with a book, I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. The external threat had been neutralized, and for the first time in years, the household felt safe, ordered, and grounded, a haven rebuilt from the chaos that had nearly consumed us. The house felt different now, quieter, but filled with a sense of safety that had been absent for far too long. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, concentrating on a puzzle, his small hands moving pieces with careful attention. I watched him from the doorway, a soft smile tugging at my lips. The chaos of the past weeks, the lies, the manipulation, the threat to my freedom was behind us. For the first time, the routines I had reinstated truly made the house a home for him. Julian joined me, leaning against the doorframe with that calm, steady presence I had come to rely on over 40 years. We exchanged a quiet glance, an unspoken acknowledgement of what we had endured and overcome together. The partnership that had once carried us through simple daily challenges had now anchored us in a crisis far greater, proving that trust, when paired with discernment, could endure even the most harrowing tests. I thought about Lila and the decisions that had brought her to this point. My heart ached for her in some ways, but the clarity I had gained could not be compromised. I had learned that love without boundaries is a fragile thing, easily exploited. The instinct to protect, to give endlessly, had to be balanced with the responsibility to safeguard those I cherished and myself. Ethan's laughter broke my reverie, bright and genuine, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He was thriving in a world where his needs and safety came first, and in nurturing that, I had found my own sense of renewal. My role was no longer one of blind sacrifice, but of mindful guidance, setting examples of honesty, resilience, and measured compassion. Sitting down beside Ethan, I took his hand in mine, feeling the warmth and trust that had carried us both through uncertainty. I realized that I could love fully and deeply while maintaining my self-respect. That empowerment was not at odds with affection, and that lessons learned from betrayal could be transformed into a legacy of stability and moral responsibility. As evening light filtered through the windows, I understood the quiet truth of our new life. Peace was not simply the absence of danger, but the presence of boundaries, clarity, and purpose. And in that clarity, I felt an unexpected sense of joy, strength, and the promise of all the days yet to come.